You know, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, so I'm going to show you some what I think are stellar photographs of restoration, and I'm going to augment it with my comments. There's so many things to say, lessons learned this 20 years, and some of the products that we came out of our Interior Highlands initiative I want to go over. But I knew Jane was going to talk about primarily how we got together and formed our alliances and the value of partnerships. So I'm going to try and bring that out of her presentation, so bear with me. So Jane was kind of the facilitator, as her role takes her in. She's the coordinator of the Central Hardwoods Joint Venture, and so I'm going to introduce you, if you haven't already seen the joint venture layout, but what part of the country we're talking about is the Interior Highlands. This is a portion of the Interior Highlands, and we're focusing on shortleaf restoration. You saw Jim Goulden's distribution map of shortleaf. I have one myself, but it'll all make sense in a little bit. Our restoration is a bit different. We're not focusing on adding acres at this time. Our restoration and what we value, it was lost through the last century of logging and high-valued products in Missouri, white oak, staves. But the shortleaf, I think I heard at one point that this kind of habitat in Missouri, they've lost 90% of. We're talking about the restoration of ecological conditions, what it was like pre-settlement. We have fire studies on the Ozarks of Arkansas and Missouri, dating between shortleaf pines between 1600 and early 1900s, 1910. And Rich Guyette's work on that fire scar study documented our historic fire regimes for us. We've mentioned before that the Ouachitas, where the highest density of shortleaf is in our part of the country, in the western range, east-west ridges, and it looks like this. We have shortleaf and shortleaf oak combinations, but primarily this is a less dissected landscape and historically would have burned pretty regularly. So historically this would have been pine bluestem. On some of the work out of Columbia and the fire shop, the direct connection between the topography that you have and the return interval of historic fires. When I say historic fires, we've done our archaeology and anthropology through the centuries. Primarily, I'm of the opinion that there were natural fires, sure, but it was the cultural fires that were the consistent managing agent that gave us what we have. But as you can see, as the landscapes become more dissected, a totally different fire regime exists there. Something for you to remember when using prescribed fire in your own neck of the woods. But there at number one, it's pretty well prairie or savanna or pine bluestem, because the larger landscapes that could burn regularly could burn a lot of land at one time uninterrupted by any kind of topographic barrier. So that's kind of the distribution pre-settlement of what you would expect in this kind of landscape, ecological conditions. So this is what Jane put in here. She had some text to and some figures about how much was logged in the early 1900s, and I think Jim Goulden also had a presentation a few years back that really documented what really happened in the early 1900s and the loss of shortleaf in our part of the country. Now, looking at the range map that Jim showed, you say a loss of shortleaf? Yes, loss of shortleaf. Where it is now in low densities and less than 50 basal area per acre was probably as dense as the Ouachita Mountains. So everybody knows this story, 100 years of fire suppression, very successful turn of society's ideas about fire. And I'm glad with our collaborations that we've actually turned this into only you can prevent wildfires nowadays. We're trying to change the public's mind about prescribed fire. I'm not going to go too deep into hers. I want to get to the joint ventures, though. Just more history there, but this is actually the Central Hardwoods region, and you can see the delta in orange of Mississippi and the densities of shortleaf pine as we experience it in the western range. So, how do we get it back? The ecological conditions. Well, it started, our initiative began with the formation of joint ventures, heavily influenced by the bird community, for birds and all birds. And the Central Hardwoods touches 7 states, and Jane is the coordinator of that. So there was interest within that joint venture about the loss of shortleaf and birds that used pine savannas, pine woodland. So we formed a group. Oh, this is a joint venture. It's made up of, has a management board. It has a coordinator and a science coordinator. And that's how joint ventures are set up. But as I say, joint ventures are us, the partners. So the chiefs of wildlife departments in the state agencies form the board, and all these organizations are represented. So I'll get into this later in my talk, but the recovery of RCW and the use of pine restoration. But she's just showing some birds that actually early successional and brush species that are going to benefit or are benefiting from restoration, showing their amount of decline and from the beginnings of the Christmas bird count to the present. And although those numbers don't really look very massive, they are through time. So grassland, shrubland birds designated as in need of management attention in the Central Hardwoods are here. And I think she, well, sorry, I thought she kind of highlighted those woodland species. But so pushing forward into what is a partnership talk, we formed a subgroup of the joint venture and added some partners, and named it this long title that I don't even want to read, but this predates the Shortleaf Initiative across its range. But our interest in restoring ecological conditions in shortleaf began in the early 90s. Just a few pairs of folks that worked together here and there. But then when we made this assembled group, pretty well unanimously, everyone wanted to work on Shortleaf. So these are the benefits. We've been blessed and we've taken advantage in the Western Range of building partnerships, and to the degree that we have a lot of influence. And if a need comes up from a media need or comments or helping with revisions of forest plans, we're readily available and insert ourselves into those processes. Strength in numbers, obviously, that tells you one of the benefits. Money. Leveraging what agencies, state agencies are already doing on the landscape is pretty easy to form a match for available grants. And we've taken advantage of that. We've even used our SWIG grants to fund burn crews, an idea you might think about. But you can't really go far unless you get a source of money. And I'll talk about this Doris Duke grant opportunity that we took advantage of in 2005 a little later. Can't have a group without somebody putting it together. Jane volunteered, but somebody has to call the meeting, somebody has to be in the lead, and she's fulfilled that job really well, of putting our notes together, distributing them for us all to make sure they were correct, or she missed something we would add, and so you have to have that. Patience. Really, it says here, our partnership is built on a long series of interactions among people in both states over 20 years. So those long-lasting relationships, once you have mutual goals and you meet with another small group that has the same mutual goal, it's very easy to fall right in instead. But make time for people. This is where a diversity of the group is great. You might not agree with the holistic management direction the group is going, but instead of separating yourself because of an opinion, you're going to come along and have a lot better chance of getting a portion of what your interests are in a collaborative group. So she highlighted some of the benefits of that, and I'm going to highlight that our collaboration for 20 years has taken us to, well, I'm going to show you.